Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept we now live in a world transformed by the nuclear industry. We expose and confront the intentional neglect and disregard for life on our planet by atomic energy. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage, to take action to save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Every voice matters. Our actions matter. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good evening. This is your host, Lonnie Clark, with the Age of Fission radio show. I want to give you a brief introduction to my guest, Dr. Helen Caldicott. I spoke with her briefly last week for about 20 minutes, and I realized I did not do her justice when I introduced her, because she is really the grande dame of the anti-nuclear movement, to be honest. She started the Physicians for Social Responsibility in the United States. She also was the founder of Women's Action for Nuclear Disarmament, which is WAND. Many of us know that organization. The Nuclear Freeze Voter Initiative Campaign in 1980, the STAR Foundation, which means Standing for Truth About Radiation, STAR. The Nuclear Policy Research Institute, which is now called Beyond Nuclear. And of course, in 2010, she started the Helen Caldicott Foundation. She has written a number of books. Let me just click on all of them. She's written Sleepwalking to Armageddon. That was her newest book. We discuss it in there. Crisis Without End, Loving This Planet, War in Heaven, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, The New Nuclear Danger, which I read on my YouTube channel, Nutzforart. She gave me permission to read it there. The Desperate Passion, Nuclear Madness, and her first version of Plan to Heal the Earth, If You Love This Planet, and Medal of Dishonor, how the Pentagon radiates soldiers and civilians with DU weapons. So she has really worked hard at exposing the facts about the nuclear industry and the U.S. military's disregard for human life. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did, and I'll join you on the other side. Good afternoon. This is Lonnie Clark, your host of the Age of Fission radio show. I want to thank you for joining us, and I am delighted to have with us Dr. Helen Caldicott, who probably needs no introduction, but for me, she is the person who has actually really started the anti-nuclear movement and has kept it in the forefront for at least 30 years, if not longer. And thank you, Dr. Caldicott, for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
That's a pleasure.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm kind of on this hot button here because the United States just passed the NDAA. They're going to start the Space Force. But I am dumbfounded about the nuclear science. You've been working to do this for a long time. You wrote a book called Sleepwalking to Armageddon. And it's a compilation of some brilliant, papers written by a bunch of different people, outlining like why we need to stop this insanity. So my question to you is, why do you think we're not getting any traction?
Because your politicians are bought and sold to the military-industrial complex. Almost all of them are corporate prostitutes. And also that the military corporations, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, I could go and name all United Technologies, etc., have put their factories to make these hideous weapons of death in every congressional district. And so if anyone tries to stop the money being allocated to weapons, everyone screams jobs. It's a really sick system. And I've just written an article about this, which, if I may, I might actually read to you, which outlines everything I think about it. Would you be interested in that?
I would love that.
Okay, so I'm just finding it on my computer.
That would be really great because, I mean, you were completely right. They are completely bought and sold.
Well, we know that. I mean, it's just sick. Okay, so here it goes. And it says everything I think. I mean, I don't really need to say anything else. I write this piece as a physician, expertly trained to make accurate diagnoses to either cure the patient or to alleviate their symptoms. I therefore approach the viability of life on Earth from a similar and honest perspective. Hence, for some, this may be an extremely provocative article, but as the planet is in the intensive care unit, we have no time to waste, and the startling truth must be accepted. As T.S. Eliot wrote so long ago, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. Will we gradually burn and shrivel the wondrous creation of evolution by emitting the ancient carbon stored over billions of years to drive our cars and to power our industries? Or will we end it suddenly with our monstrous weapons within which we have captured the energy powering the sun? Here's the stark diagnosis from a US perspective. The Department of Defense has nothing to do with defense because it is, in effect, the Department of War. Over $1 trillion of US taxpayers' money is stolen annually to create and build the most hideous weapons of death and destruction, even to launch killing machines from space. And since 9/11, $6 trillion have been allocated to the slaughter of over 500,000 people, almost all of whom were civilians, men, women and children. Brilliant people, mostly men, are employed by the massive military-industrial corporations Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, United Technologies, to name a few, deploying their brain power to devise better and more hideous ways of killing. From an unbiased perspective, the only true terrorists today are Russia and the United States of America, both of which have several thousand hydrogen bombs, larger by orders of magnitude than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, on hair trigger alert, ready to be launched with a press of a button in the US by the US President. This so-called nuclear exchange would take little over 1 hour to complete. As in Japan, people would be seared to bundles of smoking char as their internal organs boiled away, and over time the global environment would be plunged into another ice age called nuclear winter, annihilating almost all living organisms, including ourselves. But the stark truth is that the United States of America has no enemies. Russia, once a sworn communist power, is now a major capitalist country, and the so-called war on terror is just an excuse to keep this massive killing enterprise alive and well. Donald Trump is right when he says we need to make friends with the Russians because it's the Russian bombs that could and might annihilate America. Indeed, we need to foster friendship with all nations throughout the planet and reinvest the billions and trillions of dollars spent on war, killing and death to saving the ecosphere by powering the world with renewable energy, including solar, wind and geothermal, and planting trillions of trees. Such a move would also free up billions of dollars to be reallocated to life, such as free medical care for all US citizens, free education for all, to house the homeless, to hospitalize the mentally sick, to register all citizens to vote, and to invest in the abolition of nuclear weapons. The United States urgently needs to rise to its full moral and spiritual height and lead the world to sanity and survival. I know this is possible because in the 1980s, millions of wonderful people rose up nationally and internationally to end the nuclear arms race and to end the Cold War. This, then, is a sound template upon which we must act.
Wow. That's a definitive statement. That is exactly perfect. You're right. It is exactly what we must act on. It's exactly.
Yeah, and America's got no enemies. I mean, that's the the strange concept and truth. It's got no enemies, and all it does is invade other countries. It's got 800 military bases in 80 countries. How dare it? How dare it? And the United States has interfered in almost every single election since the Second World War, and then they talk about Russia. Russia really didn't interfere in your election. It's ridiculous. They just need to keep Russia as an ongoing enemy, and she's not an enemy.
Right.
What America's done is enlarge NATO right up to the border of Russia, even though America promised Gorbachev that that would not happen. They've put missiles all along Russia's border. They're extremely provocative, and this could easily lead to the annihilation of life on the planet.
It's almost as if that the United States military goads other nations to start the nuclear war. You know what I mean? Like
of course.
That's what they're doing. And the enemy du jour is Russia these days. 10 years ago it was somebody else.
It's always been Russia. And Russia hasn't invaded any country since the Second World War. They talk about the Ukraine. The Ukraine was a Russian sort of affiliate, and the world what is it? The World Monetary Fund. No, I can't.
The IMF?
EU.
EU. Okay.
Yeah, they wanted to include the Ukraine in
right, in the NATO pact, right.
Yeah, that's right, in the NATO pact. And Yanukovych, who was then president, said to Putin, what will we do? And Putin said, let's think about it for a while. But if they had done that, then joining the WHO, the Ukrainians would have lost their free medical care and free education, everything that goes along with a socialist state. And so Yanukovych was thinking about it, as was Putin. But in the meantime, Victoria Nuland, a right-wing, horrible woman, and her husband, Kagan, they orchestrated a coup in Maiden Square. And she was giving out cookies and stuff to people, and there were snipers shooting people. And Yanukovych fled, and they got a horrible man called Poroshenko as president of the Ukraine, who used to be a Nazi and had lots of Nazi sympathizers. Now, people on the east of the Ukraine, Donbass, etc., they didn't want this to happen, and so they fought the people in Kiev, etc., and that created great divisions and lots of deaths. And America supplied the Ukrainian president, Poroshenko, with weapons. Meanwhile, Crimea was also freed from Russia, but they had a referendum in the Crimea, and 96% of people said they wanted to stay with Russia because they are Russians virtually, and Russia has a big naval port there. So Russia didn't take over each of those places, and yet the New York Times, etc., they keep saying that it did, and putting out these myths and lies and untruths, drumming. And even when you watch the impeachment proceedings, even when I watched Nancy Pelosi just now make her speech pre-impeachment, she implied that Russia was an enemy.
That is the feeling in the United States, and in fact, it's on every single nation.
It's an enemy in that it's got 12 hydrogen bombs targeted on New York City, and nuclear weapons on every town and city in America greater than 50,000 people. So from that perspective, it is. But so is America, and the whole nuclear war, as I said, exchange would take 1 hour to complete, and that's it.
That's stunning.
And it could happen tonight. And here's Trump, who has the button. The nuclear codes are updated every day. There's always a man, an officer with a big leather case with the codes to start a nuclear war, walking just beside Trump. He's unhinged. he could blow up the world tonight.
Well, he could do it after
he's
he's impeached. I mean, honestly, he's such a malignant narcissist. He could do it just to spite people. And
Exactly.
that's the weird part about the whole thing, about the odd reporting about Russia in the United States, to be honest, is they act as if the Russians are still the Soviet Union, that they're still demanding, they don't even recognize. The way it's framed on American media, frankly, is like it's a mock democracy. And frankly, it's interesting because the United States doesn't mock any other democracies on the planet that I have heard of. But in the United States, you hear this often, that it's a mock, it's a Putin-style democracy, and it's not really a real democracy because Putin has complete. In fact, when I went to the University of Oregon, that's what the political science professor in my class literally explained to the class, that Putin manipulated the way that he became president so many times. Is he's got Medvedev to take over as president one time. They work together, and those two are literally have a complete dictatorial control over Russia, which is kind of stunning.
Russians love Putin. If you go to Russia, there are Putin T-shirts and Putin hats, and he's brought them together. I mean, he's not he's not the best of all men. He does kill some journalists, and
he does get rid of. But you know what? So does the look at.
But if you listen to his speeches, and he'll give a speech for 2 hours. They're quite magnificent, and he's talking about the risk of nuclear war and what we've got to do together and make friends with each other. And that's why I would support Trump, because he would like to do that, and everyone's stopping him because they want to keep making weapons and have this illusion that Russia's an enemy. I mean, the whole thing is sick.
The whole thing is sick. I mean, the whole idea is that in the United States, you can't even have a conversation. Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard are the only two Democratic candidates who are talking about rolling back the Pentagon budget. The only two out of over 20. And
yep,
you can guarantee those two are not going to be the primary candidates for the Democratic Party.
I'm not sure about that. Sanders is incredibly popular. His popularity is increasing. The Democratic Party don't want him at all, and even now Obama's speaking against him. How dare he? The networks won't cover him. I like the way he and Warren are working hand in hand. And people, I mean, he's ahead of Trump in the polls.
I know, and he was ahead of Trump in the polls in 2016. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Bernie supporter. Like I call myself a boomer for Bernie. You know what I mean? Like that's my hashtag, boomers for Bernie, because they say it's only the youth that's supporting Bernie. I mean, this is really part of the nuclear blackout. This is really like, I'm trying to get my head around this, because we cannot break through. Like the mainstream media has nobody talking about the threat of nuclear weapons or the threat of nuclear contamination.
I sent that article to the New York Times. I thought it was a good article, although somewhat provocative. They refused to.
Did they really?
To print it? Yeah.
Wow.
So I got it published in a little online paper here. But
have you submitted it to Counterpunch or anything like that?
No.
I mean, Counterpunch is a good article, good place where
I'm posting everywhere. Well, maybe because it's already been published, Counterpunch wouldn't take it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not into publishing, but that's really your article that you wrote is really so succinct. It really needs to be heard, because we do need to route. I have the hardest time, though. It's almost as if young people's eyes glaze over. They just don't want to hear it. They don't want to believe it's real.
Yeah, but that's because they're ignorant, Lonnie. They don't know what's going on. As Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. And in the 80s, we informed the democracy. Every single person in America knew about the risk of nuclear war and what it would mean.
Yeah.
Where do you think I should send it? Have you got some suggestions?
How about The Nation magazine? Or how about The Intercept? What about The Intercept?
I don't know the Intercept at all.
Oh.
I read The Nation every day.
Well, the Intercept is was founded by Glenn Greenwald and what's that other cat's name? Naomi Klein.
Yeah, right.
Naomi Klein, yeah. Glenn Greenwald, and
yeah,
I can see the other guy's face, but I can't remember his name. But they have, you can go online. They do great podcasts every week. They're really, they are very willing to tell the truth.
Yeah, but I want a lot of people to read it, not just sort of left-wing so-called people. I might send it to The Nation and to Katrina and see what they think.
That'd be interesting. I mean, maybe that one. I mean, The Nation, I would say maybe, I don't know. How about the Huffington Post?
Yeah, not a lot of people read HuffPost now, I think.
Well, it's promoted on the internet all the time. I mean, it's like it makes the Google News. If I open up Google and look for the news, every day there's Huffington Post articles.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've had articles published there before. Okay, well, I'll try.
It's just an idea because, it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall because, honestly, we really do.
You don't know what will stick.
Yeah, and that's why I do my radio podcast. Granted, there's not a lot of people listening to me, but I refuse to give up because I told someone, I said this, I'm kind of like plutonium. I'm not going anywhere for a long time because
that's nice. I like that, Lonnie.
This is a serious critical issue and we don't have a lot of time. That's the thing. Like,
it could happen tonight.
That's right. And, it could happen the thing is, unless there was a big, gigantic explosion that somebody could report on, I don't think they'd tell us. If they could do it underground, they would. You know what I mean? And not let us know. If they could do something in a subversive way.
Who's they? Who's they?
The military.
Oh, no. It'll be a full-scale nuclear war, and that's it.
You think that it's going to just be full-scale? They're just going to go straight out?
Well, there's nothing else that's planned. Nothing else is planned. North Korea could blow up New York, yeah, and that would be a good example to the rest of the world of what we're talking about. But that won't happen. Everything's planned to go all at once.
Dr. Caldicott, what would happen? You would know this answer. What would happen if, say, a city was bombed with a nuclear bomb where there was a nuclear power facility like New York has Indian Point there, which is its own catastrophe?
Yeah, they'd all melt down. They'd all melt down.
They'd all melt down.
You couldn't have a Second World War in Europe now because it's so covered with nuclear reactors.
Right. That's my thinking.
And also in the Ukraine there are still 15 nuclear reactors, including Chernobyl.
I know. That is really... And that's one of the things people don't realize is that's in fact, I think, why the United States military wants them. They consider that to be their... Frankly, they consider all of us to be assets on a balance sheet. We literally, none of us have any value to them except what can make them money. It is...
That's true, Lonnie. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we've talked enough. I've read the article. It's everything I think. And I'm going to hang up now and I'm going to get on and send... I want the article to go... I'd like it to go viral. But I'll send it to those other places that you suggested and see what happens, huh?
Oh, that would be awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, Dr. Caldicott. Thank you for speaking with us, and I'm going to, ask you to come back in a little while again so we can maybe keep this ball rolling.
What, after the nuclear war?
Well, hopefully right before it. Maybe we'll be instrumental in stopping it. How about that?
That'd be very good, Lonnie. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Lovely
you,
to
Doctor.
Talk to you.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, the idea originally last week when I did this interview was to go on with Vinny from Real Liberty Media and we could talk about the interview. But that didn't really work because the system, for some reason, wasn't reading my information. So it took us about 15-20 minutes to realize that. And so I ended up sending him the original audio and they played it on their show and it was really great. But then afterwards... Vinny got tied up and I couldn't talk to Vinny. So I ended up talking to Grimner, who's the producer. And that was quite an interesting conversation. I think it's up there live. I don't know how much of it he put up. But we basically did discuss some of this, but his primary thing was that he's a libertarian, and I mean in the hardcore sense, does not believe in government. Each man to himself. The issue of nuclear weapons is actually a big thing when you think about if, let us just say the government's collapsed. What would we think would happen with all the nuclear power plants and all the nuclear weapons? And I mean, who are we going to trust to people who have no accountability to anyone but themselves? Or the community, if the community decides that they're going to take action. What if the community decides they're not going to take action? So anyways, we got off onto a tangent because I've heard that argument before, and I personally do not agree with it. I do believe in governance. I do believe in democracy. I think humans form governments naturally of some types, and I think they can be good, and they can be rotten, and right now we're living in the rotten times. All that being said about how the conversation went, that had absolutely nothing to do with nuclear contamination other than the peripheral issue of who, if we have no governments, then who gets to deal with all this stuff that's too expensive and there's no profit margin in it. They'll just let everybody die. So that's the big question for me. This is why I can't abide with this anarchy concept, because anarchy doesn't work, because we make chemicals and poisons that we've already made them. We have to deal with them somehow. And I think that we need to, A, stop making them, and B, have people held accountable. Real responsibility, real science, and real truth. And the government should just tell us, man, this stuff is bad, and you guys need to protect yourself. And yes, unfortunately, it's gotten out into the atmosphere, and this is how high it really is, and this is where your food is, and we'll test your food, and we test things and let people know what it is. That whole conversation that I had with Grimner, I did not record. And I didn't find out until after we stopped talking. So that morning for me, technology was not my friend. I did want to bring up some of the issues that Helen did talk about in her letter. For me, that stuck out like a sore thumb. And the one thing that got them peaked up, and this is why we got into the conversation about the government, was this thing about Bernie being popular. It doesn't matter if Bernie's popular or not. The industrial military complex runs our government. I get that. I hear lots of people saying, well, we don't have democracies. That is a true statement as long as the DNC decides to click its heels and go Sig Heil along with the Republicans. I mean, it is why. It's because we have, just like Helen Caldicott said, people that are bought and sold by the industrial military complex. At some point, my goal is to allow them to see that it's not worth it. We need people to stand up. We need our officials to stand up. So I'm big on that. Although I don't think they will. Look, we're publicly torturing Julian Assange. I mean, I don't know. So that was A. So I would love for Bernie to be the primary winner. If Bernie won, I would be knocked off my socks. If the DNC did not, it's a done deal. We're going to get Biden shoved down our throat. He's been anointed. He is their media boy. He won't give them any flack. All of the corporatists, all the people on the left, the so-called left, which is not left. The left got left. We're not the extreme left. We're the left that was left because the left went right. When they're not even right, they're wrong. So the left went wrong. I diverge from the conversation here, folks. But so that was the thing about Bernie. And the other part was when she was talking about she could support Trump. And I didn't want to interrupt her because I agree with her. We need to make friends with Putin. And we need to be stop villainizing the Russians and or the Chinese. It's the same thing. We're villainizing the Chinese recently. these are two superpowers, and we need to get along with them. But Trump is not trying to get along with them because it's best for the United States. Trump is getting along with Russia because he's their little patsy boy and doing whatever he wants because he wants to build buildings in their country, and he wants to make a lot of money, and I believe that his kids probably already are out of all of that. So, that's the one thing, Dr. Caldicott, that I don't agree with, because it's not that he wants to get along with Russia so much for the sake of the United States. He wants to get along with Russia for the sake of Donald Trump. I mean, he makes the ambassadors, he makes all the note takers in the White House throw their notes away when he meets with Russia. We've never had that. It's unprecedented. Really, the guy is an outright criminal. What was the other thing? Dr. Caldicott talked about submitting her thing to the Times. Well, her article calls the military murderers and says, how dare they? Of course the Times is not going to print that. I mean, the Times, you might think is, quote, left, but it's not. Again, it's the left. It's that left that went right or went wrong. They're become corporatists, and they're all about the industrial military complex. I mean, they're the one who's, selling us the party propaganda. I wish I could ask Dr. Caldicott today about the fires that are in her country and how close they are to the uranium mines, and actually how close she is to the fires, because it is extremely dangerous. I don't know if any of our listeners understand how dangerous the fires are in Australia, but they are spreading, and it is not good. It's a serious national emergency. American and European firefighters are there fighting with the Australians, and there's just not enough manpower. They don't have enough firefighters to put out the fires. So I heard 2 days ago that maybe Sydney was going to burn. But what I'm concerned about is the uranium pits across there. When they leave a uranium mine open, they're not required to close it up and tidy it up like it's a done package. Uranium mines are just left open to bleed and leach in whatever goes in there, or leach out. So if there's fires and there's spewing stuff and blowing winds, I wonder how close it is to the uranium mines. I wonder what the radiation charts are down there. The 2020 Olympics, this is one of the things we talked about. The 2020 Olympics, this is a brand new story dated 12/4/2019 in Reuters. Reuters written this. This is standard, straight, not alternative. Olympics radiation hotspots found at Tokyo 2020 torch relay start, says Greenpeace by Jack Tarrant, 12/4/2019. Radiation hotspots have been found at the J Village Sports Facility in Fukushima, where the Tokyo 2020 Olympic torch relay will begin, Greenpeace Japan said on Wednesday. Greenpeace found that radiation levels around the recently refurbished venue, which also hosted the Argentina team during the Rugby World Cup earlier this year, were significantly higher than before the nuclear Daiichi reactor meltdown following the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami. I guess so. You know what they did with those refurbished venues? They used wood, reclaimed wood from the Fukushima prefecture to build the stadiums in Fukushima. Hitachi funded it. It is beyond comprehension. That is a true fact. And maybe I'll have the link if I can find it. Nuclear Hot Seat. Libby Halevi did that, and she probably has the title, and just Google for that. Refurbished wood at Fukushima Daiichi, and I'll bet you 2-1 her link for the radiation hot seat will pop up. Okay, back to this story. Greenpeace's survey found that radioactivity readings taken at the J Village on October 26th as high as 71 microsieverts per hour at surface levels. People are exposed to natural radiation of 2,000 to 3,000 microsieverts a year. Not the same. Natural radiation does not affect your body the same as radioactivity from man-made, highly radioactive, plutonium-sourced radioactivity. Complete false information there. So anyone staying at the vicinity of J Village for 2 or more days could be exposed to more than that. Yes, you will be. These readings, although not deemed life-threatening if posed for a short length of time, are 1,775 times higher than prior to the March 11th disaster, according to the NGO. The Olympic flame is due to arrive from Greece in Japan on March 20, with the torch relay officially starting from J Village in March 26th. I hope that guy is wearing a face mask. Greenpeace said in a statement that it had sent its findings to Japan's Minister of Environment but had received no response. There's a risk that heavy rain will spread these higher levels of contamination on public roads and thus recontaminate already decontaminated surfaces, warned Greenpeace specialist Sean Burney, team leader of the J Village survey, in a statement. The ministry official acknowledged to Reuters on Wednesday that the ministry had been alerted to higher radiation levels in the area surrounding J Village, and that decontamination measures had been taken place. Of course they had, because you know what? It's not going to work. The ministry cooperated with related groups to decrease radiation levels in that area, said the official. Yeah. On December 3rd, Tokyo Electric Power took measures to decrease radiation levels in said area. So they just go dig out a little bit of dirt, brush it away, but it's going to come back. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear station, located about 130 miles northeast of Tokyo, was rocked by a magnitude 9.0 earthquake and subsequent tsunami in March 11th, sparking 3 nuclear reactor meltdowns that have not stopped yet either. More than 160,000 residents fled to nearby towns in the aftermath as radiation from the reactors contaminated water, food, and air. Greenpeace called on the Japanese government to conduct more extensive radiation surveys in the area, and the NGO planned to return to J Village soon to determine if subsequent decontamination attempts have been adequately conducted. Of course they will. They need those big donors. Tokyo 2020 organizers could not be immediately reached for comment. Worries that local food could be contaminated by the nuclear disaster has prompted plans by South Korea's Olympic Committee to buy radiation detectors and ship homegrown ingredients to Japan for its athletes at the Tokyo Games. Additional reporting by Mari Saito, editing by Simone Cameron Moore. Wow. Well, that's what you should do if you are going to go to the Tokyo Olympics. Bring your own food, because they are mixing highly contaminated rice with not barely contaminated rice. So they're not doing us any favors, folks. It is definitely not a good scene to go to Tokyo right now. So I do not know how we're even allowing it, why there are not massive protests about this. So I'm going to read you a story from nuclear-news.net. It's time to stop making nuclear waste, theme of January 2020. The world is rightly becoming aware of the climate crisis. Don't be fooled by the nuclear industry's lies about solving that crisis. Nuclear waste is a crisis now. Already there are hundreds of thousands of metric tons of radioactive trash piled up in nuclear countries. A crisis that rivals climate change. A crisis that means more sickness, more danger, more terrorist risk, more secrecy and security, heading to police states. It's time to face up to it. It's a massive and pressing problem in the USA because USA was the first to develop nuclear power and nuclear weapons in a big way. And because there is freedom of speech in the USA, so people know about the problem. Anxiety about the nuclear waste problem is growing in Britain and France and some European countries. Russia undoubtedly has a massive radioactive waste problem, but you don't get to hear about it in a totalitarian state. And China? China has huge pollution problems from industry, but little public acknowledgement of its nuclear waste. Still, there are protests. Nobody wants the waste in their backyard. And smaller non-nuclear countries, like Australia, still face the radioactive horrors from uranium mining and the threat of nuclear waste dumping. That is for sure. Christina McPherson, December 28th, 2019. I encourage everyone to go to this website on the regular, nuclear-news.net. War planners ignore the fire effects of nuclear bombing. This is really sad. This is City on Fire, Nuclear Darkness by Lynne Eden, December 30th of December 2019. By ignoring the fire damage that would result from a nuclear attack and taking into account blast damage alone, U.S. war planners were able to demand a far larger nuclear arsenal than necessary. For more than 50 years, the U.S. government has seriously underestimated the damage from nuclear attacks. The earliest schemes to predict damage from atomic bombs, devised in 1947 and 48, focused only on blast damage and ignored damage from fire, which can be far more devastating than blast effects. The failure to include damage from fire in nuclear war plans continues today. Because fire damage has been ignored for the past half-century, high levels of U.S. decision-makers have been poorly informed, if informed at all, about the extent of damage that nuclear weapons would actually cause. As a result, any decision to use nuclear weapons almost certainly would be predicated on insufficient and misleading information. If nuclear weapons were used, the physical, social, and political effects could be far more destructive than anticipated. How can this systematic failure to assess fire damage have persisted for more than half a century? The most common response is that fire damage from nuclear weapons is inherently less predictable than blast damage. This is untrue. Fire damage is just as predictable as blast damage. One bomb, one city. To visualize the destructiveness of a nuclear bomb, imagine a powerful strategic nuclear weapon detonated above the Pentagon, a short distance from the center of Washington, D.C. Imagine that its near-surface burst about 1,500 above the ground, which is how the military planner might choose to wreak blast damage on a massive structure like the Pentagon. Let us say that in an ordinary near day with visibility at 10 miles, that the weapon's explosive power is 300 kilotons, the approximate yield of the most modern strategic nuclear weapons. This would be far more destructive than the 15 kiloton bomb detonated at Hiroshima or the 21 kiloton bomb detonated at Nagasaki. I guess so, it's a 300 kiloton bomb. 300, from 21 to 300. Washington, D.C. has long been a favorite hypothetical target, but a single bomb detonated over one capital city is probably not a realistic planning assumption. When a former commander-in-chief of Strategic Command, U.S. Strategic Command, read my scenario, he wanted to know why I only put one bomb in Washington. We must have targeted Moscow with 400 weapons, he said. He explained the military logic of planning a nuclear attack on Washington. You'd put one on the White House, one on the Capitol, several on the Pentagon, several on the National Airport, one on the CIA, and I think of 50 to 100 targets right off. I would be comfortable saying that there would be several dozen weapons aimed at D.C. Moreover, he said that even today with fewer weapons, what would make sense would be a decapitating strike against those who command military forces. Today, he said, Washington is no less in danger than during the Cold War. That's because they create the war. The decision that follows greatly understands the damage that would occur in a concerted nuclear attack. And not only because I describe the effects of a single weapon, I describe what would happen to the humans in the area, but I do not concentrate on injury, the tragedy of lives lost, or the unspeakable loss of the nation of its capital city. These are important, but I am concerned about how organizations estimate and underestimate nuclear weapons damage. Thus, I focus largely, as do they, on the physical environment and the physical damage to structures. With this in mind, let us look at some of the consequences of a nuclear weapon detonation, from the first fraction of a sound to the utter destruction from the blast of the fire that would happen within several hours. This would allow us to understand the magnitude of the damage from both effects, but particularly from fire, which is neither widely understood nor accounted for in a damage prediction in the U.S. nuclear war plans. Unimaginable lethality. The detonation of a 300 kiloton bomb would release an extraordinary amount of energy in an instant, about 300 trillion calories within a millionth of a second. Okay, 300 trillion calories within a millionth of a second. More than 95% of the energy initially released would be in the form of intense light. This light would be absorbed by the air around the weapon, superheating the air at very high temperatures and creating an intense ball of intense heat, a fireball. Because this fireball would be so hot, it would expand rapidly. Almost all of the air that originally occupied the volume within and around the fireball would be compressed within a thin shell of superheated, highly glowing, high-pressure gas. The shell of the gas would compress the surrounding air, forming a deeply fronted, luminous shockwave of enormous extent, and the power-to-blast wave. Wow. A luminous shockwave in enormous extent and power, the blast wave. I guess it's called the blast wave. By the time the fireball approached its maximum size, it would be more than a mile in diameter. The fireball. It would very briefly produce temperatures of more than 200 million degrees Fahrenheit, about 100 million degrees Celsius, about 4 to 5 times the temperature at the center of the sun. The enormous release of light and heat would create an environment of almost imaginable lethality. Vast amounts of thermal energy would ignite extensive fires over urban and suburban areas. In addition, the blast waves and the high-speed winds would crush many structures and tear them apart. The blast would also boost the incidence and rate of fire spread by exposing ignitable surfaces, releasing flammable materials, and dispersing burning materials. Within minutes of detonation, fire would be everywhere. Numerous fires and fire brands, burning materials that set more fires would coalesce into a mass fire. Scientists prefer this term to firestorm, but I will use them interchangeably here. A mass fire, huh? The fire would engulf tens of square miles and begin to heat enormous volumes of air that would rise, while cool air from the fire's periphery would be pulled in. Within 10 minutes of the detonation, a pumping action would rise. From rising hot air would generate superheated ground winds of hurricane force, further intensifying the fire. Virtually no one in an area of 45 to 65 square miles would survive. A little farther away, within minutes of a detonation, fire would be everywhere. Numerous fires and firebrands burning materials that set more fires would decrease into a mass fire. So hold on just a second, I didn't scroll up. Oh, yeah. Well, where did it go? Okay, a little farther away, 3 miles from ground zero. It looped back. It wasn't put in correctly, but that's okay. The first indicator of a mass fire would be strangely shifting ground winds of growing intensity near ground zero. Such winds are entirely different from the unrelated to the earlier blast waves that exert drag pressure of structures. Wow, a hurricane of fire. These fire winds are of such physical consequence that the rise of heated air over large areas of ground surface, much like a gigantic bonfire. The inrushing winds would drive the flames from combusting buildings horizontally towards the ground, filling streets with hot flames and firebrands, breaking in windows and doors and causing the fire to pump hundreds of feet to swallow anything that was not yet violently combusting. These extraordinary winds would transform the targeted area like a huge hurricane of fire. Within tens of minutes, everything within approximately 3.5 to 4.6 miles of the Pentagon would be engulfed in a mass fire. The fire would extinguish all life and destroy almost everything else. Wow. Let me see how much time we've got here. I think there's only a few more. Oh, we have a few minutes. I think I can finish this article, so I'm going to go back to it. Because that was pretty amazing, wasn't it? Okay. Firestorm physics. The description of the physics of mass fire is based on the works of a few scientists who have examined in detail the damaging effects of nuclear weapons, including nuclear engineer Theodore A. Postol and physicist Harold Brody. Postol, P-O-S-T-O-L, is one of the country's leading non-government funded technical experts on nuclear weapons, missiles, and arms control. Brody's, B-R-O-D-E, Brody's 5-decade career has been devoted to the study of nuclear weapons effects. That mass fires have occurred and that something like the firestorm described here could occur is not in dispute. What is widely accepted is that nuclear weapons detonated in urban and suburban areas would be virtually certain to set mass fires, and that the resulting damage is as predictably as blast damage. Wow. The much more widely held view is that the probability of the range of mass fires depends on many unpredictable environmental variables, including rain, snow, humidity, temperature, time of year, visibility, and wind conditions. But the work of Bristol, Brody, and Brody's collaborators show that mass fire creates its own environment. Except in extreme cases, environmental factors do not affect the likelihood of mass fire. Weather can affect the fire's range, but this can reasonably be well predicted. For nuclear weapons of approximately 100 kilotons or more, the range of destruction from mass fire will generally be substantially greater than from blast. The extraordinary high air temperatures and wind speeds characteristic of a mass fire are the inevitable physical consequence of many simultaneous ignitions occurring over a vast area. The vacuum created by buoyantly rising air follows from the basic physics of combustion and fluid flow, hydro or fluid dynamics. As the area of the fire increases, so does the volume of rising over the fire zone, causing even more air to be sucked in from the peripheral of the fire at increasingly higher speeds. Only a few mass fires have occurred in human history, those created by British and U.S. conventional incendiary weapons and the U.S. atomic bombs in World War II. These include fires that destroyed Hamburg, Dresden, Kassel, Darmstadt, Stuttgart in Germany, and Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki in Japan. History's first mass fire began the night of July 27, 1943, in Hamburg, created by Allied incendiary raids. Wow. Within 20 minutes, 2/3 of the buildings with an area of 4.5 square miles were on fire. It took fewer than 6 hours for the fire to be completely burned to an area of more than 5 square miles. Damage analysts called it the Dead City. Wind speeds were of hurricane force. Air temperatures were 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Between 60,000 and 100,000 people were killed in the attack. And mass fire from a modern nuclear bomb would be expected to destroy a considerably larger urban area or suburban area in a similarly short time. The unique features of the mass fire fundamentally distinguish it from the more slowly propagating line fire. Fire environments created by mass fires are fundamentally more violent and destructive than small-scale fires, and they are far less affected by external weather conditions. They are not substantially altered by seasonal or daily weather conditions. Average air temperatures in the burning areas after the attack would become well above the boiling of water. Winds generated by the fires would be hurricane force, and the fire would burn everywhere with this intensity for 3 to 6 hours. Even after the fire burned out, street pavement would be so hot that even tracked vehicles could not pass over it for days, or buried, unburned material from collapsed buildings could burst into flames if exposed to air even weeks after the fire. Those who sought shelter in basements of strongly constructed buildings could be poisoned by carbon monoxide seeping in or killed by oven-like conditions. Those who tried to escape through the streets would be incinerated by the hurricane-force-laden winds with firebrands and flames. Even those able to find shelter in the lower level sub-basements of massive buildings would likely die of eventual heat prostration, poisoning from fire-generated gases, or lack of water. The firestorm would eliminate all life in the fire zone. All publication data from The Whole World on Fire by Lynne at Google, and you can find it. It's www.nucleardarkness.org/web/cityoonfire/. So that's Nuclear Darkness, nucleardarkness.org. Well, that was a good find considering our conversation with Dr. Caldicott, don't you think? Well, you guys, we'll talk to you guys next week. Happy New Year. Welcome to the 2020 world. And it is up to us. Put your courage feet on. Remember, happiness is resistance. It's the only thing we have left. We can't let them take it from us. Put your courage feet on. We'll talk to you guys next week. Thank you for joining the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We'll be back next week to bring you more information about the nuclear industry and the harm it's causing our planet and humanity. Find all of our podcasts on Spreaker.com or on YouTube at nutzforart, nutzforart. Thank you for being part of the solution.